Another travel ban, but revised. Donald Trump's new executive order exempts Iraq. The White House says it will make the U.S. safer. President Trump's stated aim is to bar what he calls the bad guys from entering his country. But at what cost? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. It was one of the most contentious decisions of Donald Trump's presidency, the executive order banning citizens of 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the United States. And it was met with fierce resistance in the form of protests across the country and was struck down by the courts. On Monday, President Trump signed off on a new ban that deals with some of the legal challenges that blocked the original immigration order. He seems determined to push ahead with a policy he says will keep America safe. The question is, if it is not blocked again, will it really prevent attacks on U.S. soil, or will it split families and prevent people in genuine need from reaching safety? Rob Reynolds reports.
No fanfare, no TV cameras this time around, but the U.S. has a new controversial travel ban. The executive order was signed by President Trump, but it's been watered down after the original order was stopped by federal courts. Now, the country's attorney general believes fresh legal opposition will fail.
The Department of Justice believes that this executive order, just as the first executive order, is a lawful and proper exercise of presidential authority.
The state attorney general, who successfully challenged the original order, said he'd decide within days if he challenged the new one, adding that the administration clearly realized its legal position was untenable.
Bottom line is the president has capitulated on numerous key provisions that we contested in court about a month ago. So on those key provisions, this is a very significant victory for the people of the state of Washington.
The first travel ban brought disruption to U.S. airports. People with valid visas were turned back. Lawful legal residents were tied up in immigration, and crowds of protesters gathered at airport terminals. This new order won't go into effect for 10 days, a delay that the government hopes will avoid more pandemonium.
We are going to work closely to implement and enforce it humanely, respectfully, and with professionalism, but we will enforce the law.
One big change from the initial order: Iraq is excluded from the countries where no immigrants will be allowed in for at least 90 days.
This intense review over the past month identified multiple security measures that the State Department and the government of Iraq will be implementing to achieve our shared objective of preventing those with criminal or terroristic intent from reaching the United States.
The leader of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate has called the order mean-spirited and un-American, and civil rights groups say the new wording doesn't change the intent.
The president's statements leading up to the first executive order, his statements afterward, and the language of the first executive order all reveal that what is essentially going on is a ban against Muslims. The fact that they've tweaked the order does not eliminate that taint.
While some groups are claiming the new order carries major concessions from the White House, for others it's not enough. And they intend to do, once again, what Trump threatened to but never followed through with: see him in court. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's take a quick look at the main changes in this new executive order. Then Iraq has been removed from the list, as we said. The White House said its nationals were excluded because of Iraq's work with the U.S. in the fight against ISIL. Travelers and refugees who have already got visas will not be barred from entering the country. Permanent residents or dual national citizens will not be turned away, and green card holders traveling abroad will no longer be at risk of being unable to return home. The original order banned Syrian refugees from entering the U.S. indefinitely. The new one removes that clause. It also has no mention of religion. Well, let's bring in our guests now, talk more about this. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Leon Fresco. He is the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in charge of immigration at the U.S. Department of Justice under the Obama administration. In London, we have Charlie Wolf, who is a U.S. political commentator based in the UK. And finally, Joanne Lynn, who is a senior legislative counsel with the ACLU. She joins us also from Washington. Good to have you all with us then. So, Leon Fresco, if I could start with you. What do you make of this new revised executive order? Is it just a dressed-up version of the old one, or does it fundamentally address some of the main criticisms of the first one?
Well, I think there are two different responses one could give, which is to say, if the exact text of this order had been drafted in this exact manner, you know, this new order, I think one could say that if a different president had drafted this exact order in a different circumstance, it would most likely survive constitutional muster and would survive a challenge in the courts. The question that you have now moving forward in the courts is, given the circumstances by which this particular order was drafted, meaning the previous order and the campaign statements and statements of others, does that reveal a non-facially legitimate and non-bona fide reason for this order? Because that's the test that the courts are going to be looking at. Is it a facially legitimate and bona fide order? And if they think that it's not, because there is a discriminatory intent based on either statements that were made or the prior draft, then the court may provide extra scrutiny and strike the order. But I do think that the text of the order itself, had it been drafted by a different administration in a different circumstance, would most likely survive constitutional muster because it excludes green card holders, it excludes visa holders, and depending on how this waiver process is created in the embassies, if it's a legitimate waiver process whereby people actually have a legitimate opportunity to still obtain a visa, and that remains to be seen. But if people do have a legitimate opportunity to obtain a visa in these 6 prohibited countries, I do think we've gone a significant way forward toward improving the prior order, which had so many of these problems that were frankly unsolvable and needed to be stricken down as part of litigation.
Joanne Lynn, I know the American Civil Liberties Union is going to likely challenge this the same way they did the first order. But does this, in terms of the legal aspects of this, does this particular order address some of the problems that were created in the second one, in terms of clarifying the issue for green card holders, taking Iraq off the list, not mentioning religion in any of the language, and so on? Is this going to make it more difficult for your organization to challenge this in the courts?
Good morning. Yes, all of those concessions that you just listed are capitulations that President Trump and his administration have had to make because of the fact that their original Muslim ban was blocked by courts around the country and protested fiercely by Americans across the country. That being said, what was issued yesterday by the president remains a ban, and we strongly believe that it still remains a Muslim ban. And that's for several important reasons. One, Donald Trump made it eminently clear, both as a presidential candidate and since assuming office as president, that he wanted to block Muslims from entering the United States. He made that known through his own statements, through the statements of his surrogate and campaign advisor, Rudy Giuliani. That evidence was made to the entire world, and the judges who are going to be reviewing this new Muslim ban have that in their minds. There's nothing that the president can do to erase his patent discriminatory intent. Secondly, even if you look at this revised Muslim ban, which has been narrowed some, it still impacts Muslims. All 6 countries that are still listed are Muslim majority countries. If you look at the countries that are still targeted, they make up the vast majority of Muslim refugees who enter the United States. So no matter how this administration wants to spin this or how they may want to disguise this, yesterday's executive order remains a Muslim ban. The American Civil Liberties Union will continue challenging in court, and in the legislatures and in the streets, and we believe ultimately that this revised Muslim ban will fail.
Charlie Wolf, what's your view on this? And if this is still essentially the same ban, isn't it likely to go the same way in the courts and get struck down?
Well, hopefully they've made enough amendments and corrections to this that it should not have a problem. I think if there's been any spinning, unfortunately, it's been our other guest just a moment ago with this so-called Muslim ban. It's not a Muslim ban. It was not about migrants. It was not about refugees. It was a travel ban. And the nations...
Hold on a second. Why do you say it's not a Muslim ban?
Well, because first off, the classification was based on the fact that these are countries that have jihadi governments, if they have governments at all. They weren't cooperating with the United States in providing information on people coming into the country. It was as simple as that. It had nothing to do with Muslims, or you would have had Indonesia or Saudi Arabia or a host of other countries. I think.
Hold on a second. Let me just refer you to what Joanne Lynn was saying there. She talked about one of Trump's surrogates, Rudy Giuliani, essentially admitting that it was in fact a Muslim ban. I've got the quote for it here when he appeared on television.
Well,
he said, I tell you the whole story. When he first announced it, he said Muslim ban. He called me up. He said, put a commission together. Show me the right way to do it legally. Isn't that a dressed up Muslim ban?
No, I don't think it is. It's by chance that, yes, these are Muslim nations, but unfortunately these were where you are finding jihadi terror. And that's the reason why it happened. And again, why not other nations? Do you want to say that President Obama was instituting a Muslim ban? The nations were classified by his administration. So I think it's unfortunate that the ACLU is taking the tack that they are. Let's not forget that nations do have the right to protect their borders. They have the right to define their borders, and they have a right as to who they let in and who they don't let in for whatever reasons they want. And in his case, he feels this is for the safety of America, rightly or wrongly. This is what he campaigned on. This is what he was voted on. And I get the impression already that there are groups like the ACLU that are judge shopping, looking for activist judges that will follow their line of ideology. So again, I think they're more interested in pushing forth an ideology and not taking a more wider view of the president's responsibility of protecting the nation.
All right, we can get into, you bring up a number of issues there. We can get into some of that more a little bit later. But I want to come back to Leon Fresco, if I can. And I want to ask you, Leon, as well, in terms of the legal issues here, the argument is made, regardless of the merits of this particular order. The argument is made is that the President of the United States, under the Constitution, has very broad powers when it comes to issues of national security, and that in that respect, the courts don't have the right to challenge this, that it is a kind of judicial overreach. What's your view on that?
Well, that's sort of, here's what it is. What happens is, depending on the level of contact to the United States that a foreign national has, they have increasing levels of what are known as due process. So that is why, for instance, a lawful permanent resident, which was previously under the ban, was so problematic, was they actually had a due process right to challenge this ban that applied to them in court. And visa holders would have been the intermediate group as to a level of due process that they would have had that would have been less than a lawful permanent resident, but more than an individual who's never stepped foot in the United States. And this order excludes them too, so as to not create that problem. So now we're literally talking about just individuals who have not stepped foot in the United States, who have no visas. Will those individuals have a right to sue in a court of law about the fact that they are being excluded from the United States as a categorical nation exclusion? And the problem is that this is where the courts have said, for individuals who are not in the United States and have no ties to the United States, they typically have no rights to sue about their exclusion from the United States. Having said that, the courts have put a standard in to the extent that that exclusion affects any individuals in the United States, such as maybe a spouse who wants to petition for that individual, or a university that wants to petition for that individual, that the exclusion must be what's called facially legitimate and bona fide. And so the test that's going to be conducted by the courts is, was this executive order facially legitimate and bona fide?
All right, let me turn back to Joanne Lynn then, and I want to put some of the points that Charlie Wolf made earlier about how this is going to go in the courts, and that it depends on what sort of a judge that you're going to get. If you're going to get someone who is more friendly to the ACLU and to these kind of decisions, what's your view on that?
Well, contrary to what Mr. Wolf said, the American Civil Liberties Union is not interested in judge shopping, but we are very much in the business of seeking justice under the Constitution. And if you look at all the judges who reviewed the first Muslim ban, all but one found that there were serious flaws and blocked the ban from going into effect in some form. And all of the judges, except for one, rejected most of the arguments presented by the Trump administration in court. So we remain confident that any court looking at this revised Muslim ban is going to see it for what it is. And that is a thinly disguised ban that is the delivery of President Trump's promise to block Muslims from entering the United States. But beyond what President Trump had said, on the campaign and as president, let's look at what the Department of Homeland Security's intelligence has shown us. Last week, there were two major reports that the media reported on. One found that citizenship is an unreliable predictor of terrorism activity. And that report specifically found that if you looked at foreign nationals from these 6 countries, that they were rarely implicated in terrorism in the United States. A second Homeland Security report that was written by the Office of Intelligence and Analysis found that if you looked at people in the United States who were foreign-born and engaged in violent extremism, that the majority of them entered the United States and became radicalized years later after entering the United States.
All right.
So if you look at these two government reports together, what do they say? They basically say that a government ban to block Muslims from entering the United States in the future will be counterproductive and will not enhance our national security. Finally, let's not forget, remember the Trump administration had said that they were going to withdraw the original Muslim ban and introduce a new Muslim ban because it was urgent as a matter of national security. Well, they said that 3 different times, delayed it 3 different times. So clearly the fundamental rationale of this being a national security measure has been undermined by this administration's delays repeatedly.
Let's expand on some of that now. We're going to show this graphic that shows you some of the major attacks that have occurred in the United States. The U.S. administration saying that this travel ban is necessary to ensure domestic security, but the reality is that since September 11th, 2001, major incidents that have taken place have not involved individuals from any of the 6 countries named in the executive order. In 2009, an Army officer went on a shooting rampage at the Fort Hood military site in Texas, killing 13 people. He is a U.S. citizen. He was a U.S. citizen born to immigrant Palestinian parents. In 2015, 14 people were killed in a mass shooting and attempted bombing in San Bernardino, California. One of the attackers was an American citizen, while the other was born in Pakistan. And last year, 49 people were killed when a man with an assault rifle opened fire at a popular gay nightclub in Florida. He was a U.S. citizen with Afghan parents. So, Charlie Wolf, if I can come back to you on this, we've just highlighted 3 of the worst attacks on U.S. soil in recent years. Not a single one of those attackers was from any of the 6 countries that are on this banned list. So if this is all about national security and protecting Americans, how does it do that?
Well, again, talk to the Obama administration. It was based on the fact that these were nations that were not cooperating with the United States as far as who was coming into this country, into the United States. They were countries that did not maybe have stable governments in place, and that was the criteria used by the Obama administration and then followed up by the Trump administration.
Right, but the Obama administration didn't ban citizens from those 6 countries. They highlighted those 6 countries, essentially put them to the back of the line for applying for visas. That's not the same thing as an outright ban, is it?
As important as statistical analysis is in crime prevention and jurisprudence in fighting crime and criminology. I don't think that the President of the United States, who does have wide powers, should be held to the bean counters at the Department of Justice. He has his reasons and he has his rights to, again,
What are
as
they
I stated
based on?
earlier,
What empirical evidence are they based on?
Again, if you look at Title 8 section, was it 1182, if I'm correct there on the nomenclature, that gives him wide powers to, at his discretion, stop anyone from coming into the country on whatever line he feels. And we also know that we've had ISIS already talking about, for instance, infiltrating the Syrian migrants that are coming into the States to try and gain entry into the United States to cause havoc and to cause death and destruction. So he may have information from Homeland Security or from national security that you and I don't, and that's his decision. Again, I did not see it being racial. I did not see it based on religious reasons, a hatred of Muslims, etc., because we're not banning Saudi Arabia. We're not banning other Muslim nations. We're not banning Indonesia, etc. So for whatever reasons, he had reason to believe, and he was acting within his authority and his rights.
Leon Fresco, what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, it is true that Section 212F, which is also known as Title 8, 1182F, provides the president broad powers to exclude any individual from the United States. And you can imagine many scenarios where this would be necessary. For instance, if there were communicable diseases, you would need to potentially shut down entry into the country to not prevent the worldwide communicable disease situation from entering the United States, etc. But the question that the courts will analyze in this situation was, did the president use these powers in a facially legitimate and bona fide way? And while I think this exact order, as written, probably would have survived scrutiny 99 out of 100 times had it been issued in isolation as part of an analysis of situations on the ground in these 6 countries, the question you have to figure out if you're a court is, and this is why I think it will be a close case, I actually cannot predict what will happen, is, did the statements that were made surrounding this bill, surrounding this travel executive order, create such a context where you can no longer say the executive order is facially legitimate and bona fide? And I think the reluctance that you're seeing from the state of Washington, from the Attorney General there, is showing you that everybody recognizes
let's
this
put
is
that
an
then,
extremely
let's put that then
difficult case.
to Joanne Lynn. Then we heard in the report there, the Attorney General in Washington says that this does address many of their concerns. Is that something that concerns you as you go forward in continuing to challenge this order, that the legal avenues for challenging it are not as available as they were the first time around?
No, not at all. I think the Washington State Attorney General's statement is accurate, and that the changes made in yesterday's order are direct capitulations made by the Trump administration because of their stinging defeats in courts around the country. And let's be very clear. Yes, the president has strong powers, but there is still a backstop to presidential power, and that is the United States Constitution. No one in government, including the president, can discriminate based on religion. That is a core protection that is enshrined in our First Amendment. And there's a reason that's the case. It's because the people who came to the United States from Europe, many of them were religious pilgrims who fled religious persecution. And since the founding of the United States, our founders have made clear that the government may not favor one religion over another.
All right, I just want to pick up on the religion issue there, Joanne Lim, just briefly, because this, and this was a point that was made by Charlie Wolf, it doesn't actually mention religion anywhere in this order, and it's taken out the provision that they had earlier of taking preference of religious minorities. Just briefly, how do you respond to that?
Just because the order doesn't use the word Islam or Muslim doesn't mean that it's a religiously discriminatory order. If you look at the countries that are listed, the 6 countries are all Muslim majority countries. If you look at the refugee program that is being suspended, This order is aimed at shutting down
All right.
that program and specifically trying to halt the admission of Muslim refugees from entering the United States.
We are unfortunately going to have to leave it there. We are out of time. We could certainly spend a lot longer discussing this. But thank you to all three of you, Leon Fresco, Charlie Wolf, and Joanne Lynn. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you, as always, for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, of course. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.